you know, this same-sex marriage thing has become a very big issue in the news lately, and
tell me about it.
And you know, the atheists actually care about this sort of thing, and the reason atheists care about this is because of the sort of religious undertones about the sort of various movements going on related to gay marriage. That you know, there's a lot of sort of religious prohibitions against homosexuality and such. A lot of churches have decided that they don't want to do that, and not only that, they're getting involved in the political process to ban this sort of thing. And so the atheist community of Austin is actually working on a statement related to this proposed constitutional amendment that's coming up in the news, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the atheist community of Austin is basically saying that they haven't heard any secular arguments that they believe you know, make any sense against same-sex marriage, and you know, keeping with the principle of the separation of church and state, they want to sort of make a statement that the church shouldn't be imposing their will on other Americans, that sort of thing. So that's the gist of why atheists are interested in this, or think it's important. I'm going to switch now to some of the news that's happened in regard to this issue. Things have really sort of bubbled up and become kind of front burner sorts of things. Back in June of 2003, there was this Lawrence versus the state of Texas ruling in the Supreme Court, which struck down the Texas sodomy law and indeed all sodomy laws throughout the United States. And this sort of the Supreme Court sort of banned or reaffirmed the rights of individuals to private consensual sexual acts, and this, I think, really sort of turned up some of the speed, because there was a big concern at this time whether or not this would be the harbinger of same-sex marriage coming up. And indeed, a little later on, just recently, February 2nd, 2004, the Massachusetts Supreme Court heard a case within their state that, and they decided that nothing short of same-sex marriage would pass the constitutional muster of equal protection. So it's an equal protection issue that's part of our Constitution. We say that you know, any law you have should apply equally to everybody, and one can make a case that gays are excluded. So there's a big issue. One of the things that's going on right now, the reason this has gotten so intense is, okay, well, we have Massachusetts that's going to effectively start allowing gay marriages, I think in May, and the amount of time it would take them to make a constitutional amendment to change their constitution to specifically disallow this would be several years down the road. So gay marriage is a fact. It's going to happen. People can go to Massachusetts and get married. So this begs the question of whether other states need to honor those marriages. Okay, so if we look again at the Constitution, we have the full faith and credit clause of the United States that says that if one state makes a law, particularly with regard to marriage and a lot of other things, that other states need to sort of recognize that, and we can't have sort of completely disjoint laws. And yet we have that, because we have, over the last 5 or 6 years, we have the federal government and a number of states, quite a number of states, enacting the so-called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act laws, that say if anybody else allows same-sex unions, we're not going to accept them. So it's specifically against what most people would think would be the Constitution, and in fact these things have yet to be tested in the courts. So all of this tension is building, and then on February 24th, which is very recently, Bush called for a constitutional ban on same-sex marriages because such weddings, quote, threaten the most fundamental institution of civilization. And then he had another quote where he says, marriage cannot be severed from its cultural, religious, and natural roots without weakening the good influence of society. I have a little trouble parsing that, but very often that's a problem with what he says. Okay, so basically he has decided, this is a hot button issue. This is something that he's going to run with in his candidacy. So for re-election. So that's coming up, and then all of a sudden we have a bunch of different jurisdictions throughout the United States. I think initially it was San Francisco started giving out gay marriage licenses, and then a whole bunch of other cities are doing this. So it's like a big flood. It was a dam is sort of getting ready to burst, and we're starting to see all the little leaks coming out. And we have cities like little cities in New York and New Mexico and Oregon and such. And these people who are issuing these marriage licenses are basically saying the Constitution says that any bans are invalid, and so there's a big question of whether or not these jurisdictions can go against the state laws in interpreting the constitutional law of the United States. So that's a big issue. But
from my understanding, though, is Massachusetts the only one that is legally issuing them?
That's right.
Now?
We have Vermont, who a while back is allowing what are called
something like unions? Or
yeah, domestic. They're like civil unions.
Okay.
Is what they're not called marriages.
Okay.
But
it's the same thing legally, I assume.
Well, actually, no. There's quite a bit of difference, and let's go ahead and talk about that. We have, of course, the religious marriage where you go into the church, you go down the aisle, and you have a priest or a minister or whatever blessing it and such, and that's sort of one sphere, one thing called marriage, and pretty much everything I'll say today has nothing to do with that. We're talking about the civil institution of marriage, which is where you go and get a marriage license, which is the only thing that the states recognize is this more or less legal thing. Okay. So that's something I would call civil marriage, and I think today that will be what we'll talk about when we're talking about marriage is the civil marriage. Okay. But then there's sort of shades of gray down from there. We have the notion of civil unions, which are Vermont, for example, has civil unions. They allow same-sex couples to be joined this way, and they get some benefits from the state, but they're not recognized in the United States. And if they go out of their state, it wouldn't. Okay. The full faith and credit clause wouldn't even necessarily apply.
Okay.
So it's definitely marriage light. And then even sort of further down the scale, we have a notion of domestic partnership registrations, which confers some rights in certain cities, but that's not even really on the map. So so what we're really talking about is marriage where we have two people coming together and wanting to get the full kit and caboodle of rights and privileges and responsibilities. No one's trying to shirk that. Okay, so Bush has made these claims that marriage is a sacred institution. He used that term, and talked about the sanctity of marriage, which are basically religious terms, right? Yes. So Bush is certainly welcome to his opinion, but we have the notion of separation of church and state in the United States, and what somebody believes shouldn't apply to somebody else. It's simply that simple. So, so what does this marriage amendment look like? Well, we have, it will likely change over time as it gets argued and such. But there's sort of a straw man thing called the Federal Marriage Amendment, proposed by Representative Marilyn Musgrave from Colorado, and I'll go ahead and read it to you. It says, "Marriage in the United States shall consist of only the union of a man and a woman. Neither this Constitution nor the Constitution of any state, nor state or federal law shall be construed to require that marital status of the legal or the legal incidence thereof be conferred on unmarried couples or groups." Okay, so this is a proposed constitutional amendment that basically says marriage is this, and none of the benefits of marriage can be applied in any other situation than marriage. Okay. And one of the very troubling things about this is this clause of the legal incidence thereof, and some people wonder whether, well, if I wanted to, set up a will between me and my partner, for example, would that be banned by this law? That sort of thing, because flipping it around, you have rights of survivorship that come along with marriage. So if you try to reproduce those rights via other means, does this strike that down? Which is very disconcerting.
I mean, that would have to be so far-reaching that it couldn't possibly be backed up in any way. I mean, I can write a will to leave everything I have to my brother.
Sure.
There's no legal problem against that, so why couldn't I write one if I had a partner?
So a lot of people have rightly concluded that this clause is flawed. Okay, it doesn't make sense. But I think what's interesting is that it's sort of a vindictive sort of a thing. That not only are we going to define marriage as this, but you can't have anything that looks like it.
Yeah.
Is a sort of sentiment here. Okay. So we've talked about definitions. We've talked about some of the news items. By the way, in today's Statesman, there's a very nice little article in the Insight section on gay marriage, and I recommend taking a look at that, and we might borrow some material from that later on. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is that there's three arguments that are often used against this marriage issue. There's three sort of arguments that the people who are opposed to gay marriage use, and these arguments are basically procreation, that marriage is a means of furthering our species, and it's the foundation of society. Those sorts of arguments. There's the argument that marriage has a certain amount of traditions with it, and we shouldn't be messing with those traditions because they've served us well. And then there's a number of religious arguments one can make. And I wanted to talk about each of these very briefly, or try to make it briefly. So on the procreation and foundation of society issue, yes, marriage has been associated with raising families, but humanity has had no trouble procreating, and procreation is sort of a fundamental urge that same-sex weddings will neither harm nor constitutional bans will help. It's something that's a fact. It's
inside or outside of marriage, we are going to reproduce.
We're going to reproduce, and then if you look at the world population, which is standing now at about 6.3 billion people, and it's doubled in my lifetime. One wonders, if we should be, doing this procreation, nonstop here, folks, because we're going to run out of food, we're going to run out of space, we're going to run out of all sorts of things.
And what was actually interesting is we have an email list where we get on, we discuss things amongst ourselves. A Christian actually came onto that list, and one of his arguments. And I'm trying to figure out, maybe I read it wrong or something like that, but this is the only way I could read it, is that if we allow gay marriage, then the population of the world will go down because, two men getting together can't have a kid. Two women getting together can't have a kid, at least not without help, basically. Now, the only problem I have with that is if we allow gay marriage, I'm not turning gay. I have no urge to turn gay and start dating other men.
Yeah,
and
there seems to be this underlying assumption that we have to hinder this, otherwise everybody will go doing it.
Exactly. You allow gay marriage, everybody turns gay. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt it.
So if these people really believe this, why that the purpose of marriage is for procreation, why don't we have bans on infertile couples from marrying, right? Or quotas that by the time you're married 2 years you have to produce 2 kids because
mandatory.
That's right.
Yeah, mandatory divorce at menopause.
Right, exactly, those sorts of things. So another thing to say that gays and lesbians are fertile. We can make children, and about 1/10 of gays and lesbians are parents, often through previous marriages. Although there are situations where gays are adopting or having children via artificial insemination, those sorts of things. So if marriage is to aid in parenting and the raising of children and providing a stable environment for those children, what about the children of gay people? Aren't those children important too? And why should they be penalized? So that's one thing. Another, I think, on this issue of the foundation of society, you can argue that the foundation of society, because procreation is not going to be changed, not going to be affected by this. The real foundation of society is legal contracts, is the contracts where we agree to do something, we provide each other goods and services, and so on, and there's a law system to penalize us when we don't do that. And I would claim that these legal contracts are the foundation of society. And what business is it of anybody to deny adults who can make up their mind the ability to enter into a legal contract, which is marriage? Yeah. And if anything, I think that an amendment like this is a danger to society, just because it's getting in the way of the natural course of legal contracts and such.
Well, it's also just the basic fact that it's one of the very few amendments that we've ever had that takes away the right of a certain people.
Yes.
Again, most of the amendments are what you can do and what you
have expanded on our liberties.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. They've ensured liberties.
And the only other amendment that did that was the Prohibition, which was, basically everybody considered it a huge disaster.
Yeah.
It was a temperance movement at the time to not drink alcohol, and it took hold, and they changed the Constitution, and then
we see how well that one worked out.
Yeah, that's a huge crime rate, huge problem, and speakeasies and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Made for an interesting history, but wouldn't want to live through that. Gun runners, and I think NASCAR actually got their start then, because the fast cars were needed to outrun the police.
Really?
Yeah, Prohibition was
oh, that's funny. I haven't heard
the genesis of NASCAR. So anyway, okay. Switching gears now on the tradition argument. The marriage has had a very, very interesting tradition, or not tradition, a very interesting history, and I would claim that it's evolved quite a bit over the years. There's a very good book on the subject, and there's many good books, but I'll pull up this one. This is called "What Is Marriage For?" By E.J. Graff. She is a lesbian author, but she's not necessarily got a big agenda or whatever. And she argues that marriage has changed a lot over the years. It's gone from something that is basically a property ownership. The wife to be was basically a property, and it was marriage was a financial transaction between the in-laws and the husband to be, and there was a dowry involved usually, so money transfer and so on, and that's what it usually used to be, and today what we have is something more based on equality. Women and men generally have pretty equal rights in marriage, although there's still some remnants of some of the steps along the way. And one of her arguments is that same-sex marriage is basically the ultimate conclusion of this equality between the people in the marriage partnership. So if we take a look at some of the biblical traditions, since many of the arguments against marriage are based in the Bible and based in religion, it's certainly worth taking a look at those histories. There's some very interesting things going on. We have, in biblical times, women were considered men's property. Men had multiple wives and concubines. The wives needed to be virgins at the time of the transaction. We certainly don't have any of those sorts of things now. Moses himself had a child with a slave, because at that time the assumption was, well, the woman didn't contribute anything to the child. I mean, the woman was just the bakery, right? And
wow,
the man had the seed, and the seed, germinated in the wife, and and she was a non-participant. So that was the sort of mindset, and that's how what people believed in biblical times. What you see in the sort of marriage ceremony and such is we see that many societies around this time that basically a couple would come together and give a public declaration that we were married, we want to be married, we are married, and so on. Everybody would raise their brew or whatever and say hooray, and that would be it. But the point is that for in biblical times and long before, marriages had a lot to do with the two people coming together and deciding this sort of thing themselves, or it was basically a contract between the two people.
Okay, so marriage was not something that religion introduced. Religion
Absolutely.
did not come along and say, okay,
That's
we should
right.
have
And
men and women getting together.
That's really where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
Is that in many ways religion was sort of an afterthought.
Okay.
That so we have this notion of a public declaration. So there's this sort of tension between, okay, we have two people deciding to do something together, but there's also this public part of it where maybe some rights and maybe some recognition goes on, and people need to know whether other people are married because of the taboos against infidelity, those sorts of things.
Okay.
So, and keep in mind that around this time that women in marriage were basically kind of indentured servants. They were sort of life partners of the men. They helped them out. And they were just sort of there to sort of make things go, and the early Christians spoke out against marriage for various reasons, partly because of this indentured servitude issue, which needed to be spoke out against. So that's good. The Apostle Paul discouraged marriage because it conflicted with the man's love of God. You know, it's a conflict of interest issue. Are you going to love your wife or are you going to love God?
Sort of like the Catholic priests. Can't get married, that takes away your love from God.
Right, right. So, and St. Augustine promoted celibacy. Celibacy was kind of considered a big thing in the early Christian church. St. Augustine said, I don't see what other help women would be to a man if the purpose of generating was eliminated. Okay, so at this time, the purpose of marriage was for procreation, for fidelity, avoiding fornication, which, you know, basically it's okay to mess around if it's only with one person, because any of that sex is bad, okay? But if it's for procreation, that's okay, and second down. And then the third tier was the permanent bond between the couple, and that was actually celebrated, and so on. It wasn't until the 1200s that marriage was actually considered a holy sacrament by the Catholic Church. Wow. And it was mostly because of the mutual caretaking and bond of the couple. Later, Protestants came up with the idea that this institution of marriage and being a holy thing, and that needed to be regulated and prescribed and all this. So there was this religion thing came kind of a latecomer to
this natural love that evolves among people, that they decide to spend their lives together. We have to regulate.
Yes. Yeah, and the Catholic Church is somewhat infamous for selling indulgences, which for various purposes. But one purpose was, well, you know, if you're going to marry somebody and they're a relative, that's taboo. That's yes. Not a good thing. And you had communities that were basically just familial tribes. They lived together for a long time, and basically everybody was everybody's relative to some extent. Yeah. And so you had to pay the church some money to get an indulgence, which is basically for them to overlook this problem, or to bless the marriage. So that was kind of a little bit of business for them. So. So some of the innovations that happened here, I think, with religion was that religion began to take control of the institution of marriage, or began to insert itself, and you know, for the Middle Ages, Catholic marriage is a sacrament to be instituted in order to have children legitimately and to raise them with the fear of God. Was another little interesting little quote. So there's an innovation here that, okay, well, rather than going out and conquering the world to get converts and such, why don't we just manufacture them? Why don't we just have our current believers make new believers? And if you take a long-term view, that works out very well.
Christian factories.
Christian factories, and all of the Catholic weddings I've been to, even today, this sort of theme goes on. All of the Catholic weddings I've been to have said, you know, as part of our blessing to you from God, you have to go out and make lots of children and raise them in the church. And I don't know if that, you know, is something that you've seen in Catholic weddings or not. Okay.
I haven't noticed that all that much, actually. But haven't been to too many weddings myself, so.
Okay. But on the homosexuality issue, it turns out that the Catholic Church between 500 and 1500 actually did have same-sex unions and partnerships. And there's been a big debate of whether those were really considered weddings or whether they were just, you know, two buddies that wanted to I don't know, get together, I don't know. But, and you can imagine who's on whose side. So there's actually a book on this subject called Same-Sex Unions in Pre-Modern Europe by John Boswell, which I recommend you read if you're interested in that. Okay, so more recently now, turning up the clock, we have some other changes that go on. We have the fall of the prohibitions against marriage outside one's religious denomination. It used to be very much taboo for Catholics and Jews to marry, that sort of thing. In 1967, the Supreme Court struck down states' laws restricting mixed-race marriages. So even as late as 40 years ago, we have some big changes, and religion was very much an issue at that time as well. So to conclude on this tradition issue, we have marriage really has changed a lot, and in many more ways than I've even scratched the surface of. It's very interesting sort of history. The institution moving away from property rights towards more equality and more focused on love, a little bit less on child rearing, although that's a very important part of it. And your definition of what's a traditional marriage depends on your perspective. It depends on how far back you want to look, what religious tradition you come from, what age of the religion, and so on. So with that, I want to shift gears and talk about the third sort of argument against same-sex marriage, and that is these religious arguments. And as we've said earlier, concerning civil marriage, religion really has no part in it in the United States. We have a secular government, and although we do have a religious minority of Christians, a majority of Christians, it's really not their decision. It's not their decision. So there are many religions that actually do perform same-sex blessings and such, and I think that if marriages were allowed, these religions would be performing same-sex marriages. So I think it's wrong for one religion to sort of trump another religion. That's very much against this sort of freedom of religion that we have in our country. So
I'm kind of curious, basically, as to how it came about that gay marriage is not something that we already allow. I mean, there is no law that says marriage should be, again, a white woman and a white man. And then in 1960 you said, okay, fine, one of them can be a different race. And so we kind of changed the law, and now we're going to change it again. There are no laws as far as I know.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that the laws are sort of chasing the culture, right? The culture has had these norms, about maybe taboos against mixed race marriages, yeah. And then all of a sudden people started doing that, and then they sort of said, oh, well, what are we going to? What does this mean legally? So the laws are sort of lagging behind the reality of what's going on. I think that's part of the deal there.
Because I think if you look at a lot of laws right now, they can be interpreted in such that pretty much any two people getting together would be fine. There aren't that many that restrict it. Mm-hmm. There are age restrictions out there, but I think that's really about it. I don't know. Are there laws out there that say two men cannot be married?
I think in some states it's very clear about the genders of the people involved, and I think that's what happened in Massachusetts. Is the way their constitution was written didn't mention specific genders.
Okay.
So it turned out to be easier to challenge the law there and say, what about this?
Okay.
And in other states, it's much more clear. And in fact, what's happening is there are a number of states that are actually actively going and changing their laws in order to make this very explicit.
Yes. Okay.
So again, we're seeing the chasing going on.
All right.
So I have a couple more points I want to make, and then we'll go to the callers, I guess, unless you had some other things.
No, but just quick notice. This is a live call-in show. We will be getting the calls in a little bit. Don still has a little bit to go over. If you want to give us a call and give some opinions, our phone number 477-2288. And like I said, we'll be getting to that in a few minutes. So, continue.
Okay. Well, another thing that came up in the news recently is Bush has proposed a $1.5 billion initiative for strengthening marriage. And although some of the things he's proposing is admirable, Some of the other things he's proposing would be something like giving subsidies to poor women to stay in marriages or to get married. And one has to wonder, if marriage is a sacred institution, why is somebody trying to go in and meddle with it using the government's powers? So, it's
what's the government for?
It doesn't quite add up as far as I can tell. So I think the real reason for the marriage amendment and a lot of this is simply political gain. That the Constitution is being used as a political device, in part to aid in the re-election of Bush. It's actually this constitutional amendment is completely at odds with the Republican Party's stance on federalism, which says that the state should regulate marriage and other things, that the state should have a lot of power and the federal government should stay out of these issues. So this is very much at odds with that. I see that the same groups that are really pushing this constitutional amendment are often, in many cases, the same groups that are marketing hatred of homosexuals, that are selling fear and raising money based on fear. And the deal there is that having an enemy gives you power. Okay, if you are fighting against someone and you make them out to be really bad, then you can get support, you can get money, that sort of thing. And by gays becoming more normalized and becoming a sort of a seamless part of the United States, they sort of disappear. They can no longer be labeled as the enemy. Married gays cannot be labeled as promiscuous deviates because they're out mowing their lawns or whatever, ho hum. So and I think it's, as an American, I think it's really horrible. This has become such a front burner issue when there are much bigger issues like the economy and the jobs and education that really deserve some time.
Which is what a lot of people are saying. This is the main reason for this coming up and being such a big issue, is because those things aren't exactly, our economy, while picking up, is not exactly chugging along really healthy yet.
Right.
So let's try and divert attention away.
Right.
To something that we can control, hopefully.
So some concrete suggestions are maybe we should respect the Constitution a little bit more. We should keep religion out of other people's lives. And as kind of a funny suggestion, maybe people should become an atheist. We have a little table that I pulled from a book called The Fundamentals of Extremism. And if you guys can put up the table, that'd be great. This is a list of divorce rates for persons who are currently or previously been divorced by religious belief or affiliation. We're having a little trouble with our graphic.
There it is.
There's our graphic. So we're looking at divorce rates, and basically this came from originally this came from a study titled "Christians are more likely to experience divorce than are non-Christians." And basically you can see that the divorce rates are pretty high among various divisions, but down here at the bottom we have atheists and agnostics with a lower divorce rate. So maybe we should all become atheists and agnostics and have better divorce statistics. If we want to save marriage, we can do that.
Promote atheist marriages.
But I think the sort of underlying thing here is that religious marriage and all of the baggage that comes along with it actually adds some weight to a marriage that sort of needs to be shed. And that's, I think, what you're seeing in this table. Well, thank you, guys.
I think a lot of religion kind of promotes that marriage is the expected thing to do. When you're young in a very Bible-believing, strict church, when the girl turns 16 years old, it's already kind of like, so who are you looking at now?
Oh, yeah.
It starts very young. You hit 25 and you're not married, you're an old maid.
Right.
And so, you've got to be married. There must be something seriously wrong. And so when you're kind of pressured to a certain extent into marriage, it's very likely that you're just going to, take whoever comes along. 5 years later, it doesn't work out so well, you get divorced.
Right.
Whereas atheist families or, less religious families don't have such a pressure. And so if I don't get married till I'm 30, not a big deal.
Right.
So.